devious fauna. In death, they must be kept locked away from the sunlight that would fade their delicate colors. In life, too, they are hidden, flying by night and using their patterns to deceive their enemies by day. 3,500 different species of moths survive in Britain against natural odds of 100 to 1, and they do it by deceit. The elephant hawk moth is common in Britain, in cities as well as in the country. It's quite large, with a wingspan of over 7 centimeters and spectacularly colourful. But on its food plant, the rose bay willow herb, it matches the leaves perfectly to escape detection by hungry birds. For a large moth, daylight spells danger, but at night, it comes into its own. The moth's large eyes are especially adapted for night vision, and its elegant tongue can reach the hidden sweetness. The hollow tongue is curled back when it's full, and the sugary contents sucked out. An isolated bright light disturbs the moth's built-in guidance system, and it flies helplessly towards it, dazzled. Although there's no more need for new collections of moths, most were completed around the turn of the century, the mercury vapor lamp is still used to help check on the progress of moth populations. Egg boxes save the temporary captives from injury until they can be released after checking. This is the catch of a single night from an area of Oxfordshire, perhaps 70 meters in diameter. They may be drab or gaudy, but each is adapted to a particular background. Among the expected arrivals, an oddity, a cinnabar moth, one of the few species which can fly safely by day. As can this burnet moth. It's conspicuous, but it has a disgusting flavor, and birds soon learn to avoid the red and black warning colors. The peppered moth tastes good to a bird and must wait for night motionless on a rock in order to avoid attention. Unless it moves, it's invisible, even at close range. The same species has a dark form, an adaptation which has appeared since the Industrial Revolution, when trees became blackened by soot from factory chimneys. Where the bark is clean, a blood vein can blend with it, always crossways, so that the wing stripe follows the grain. A pebble prominent acts the part of a fungus growing on a twig. The essential stage direction here: don't move. Dry chestnut leaves in a shaft of sunlight are the background to which a drinker moth has adapted. Such a precise choice of resting place is the rule among moths, dictated by the need to survive. A peach blossom moth sports imitation patches of lichen to match the bark on which it lies. All these moths seek safety by mimicking their surroundings. The beautiful golden Y mimics nothing. With tufts of hair to break up its outline, it looks like anything but a moth. Close to, perhaps, It could be mistaken for a mildewed leaf. But close or distant, this is a broken silver birch twig, the disguise of the buff-tip moth. The eyed hawk looks harmless enough until it's disturbed, when vivid eye spots pose a sudden threat. A giant bee, its tail in the stinging position, is the bluff adopted by the defenseless bedstraw hawk moth. At rest, it merges with the bark. The garden tiger has two forms of defense. The first, its gaudy front wings, advertise the fact that it is sometimes mildly poisonous. Most predators quickly learn to avoid it. If they come too close, like this hungry mouse, the second defense is used, a sudden flash of red hind wings. This warning, called fright coloration, increases its chance of escape. Sometimes the mouse is more persistent, however. In this encounter, the moth's bluff is called, as the mouse makes a meal of it. Another tiger bluffs a vole and lives. For most of the moth's life, it's a caterpillar, with the odds even higher against survival. A caterpillar tractor destroys hedges, a favorite breeding ground. In nature, fallen trees would provide shelter for moths and caterpillars alike. But in a week, this one will be gone, to be replaced by tarmac. Add the activities of man to a moth's natural enemies, like the blue-tit, which feeds its young with thousands of caterpillars, and you can see how slender are a moth's chances of survival. The slow-motion camera shows the hammering a privet hawk caterpillar takes in a rainstorm. But a waterproof coat is not all the moth needs if it is to grow up successfully. Dummy eyes, matching colors, and confusing camouflage will all have their place. The caterpillar's task in life is to eat and not be eaten. The object, to survive 4 weeks against the odds. The emperor caterpillar bristles with nettle-like spines. Its colors a warning of indigestibility. Its feet are adapted to cling on even through a gale. Even at the start of its life, a moth must deceive to survive. A lapid, itself like a curled leaf, lays green eggs on a twig. As the eggs dry in the air, they develop white rings which break up their outline. The female may lay 50 in a night. Inside the leathery shell, the lottery of life begins for a new generation. 1 in 100 will gain the prize of adulthood. For an elephant hawk, the first round begins 10 days after the egg is laid, as the tiny caterpillar, 3 millimeters of potential moth, fights its way to the air, armed only with 2 horny jaws and the instinct to succeed. Once the caterpillar is free of the egg, the primary instinct is triggered by the creature's tiny brain: eat. First the egg case, an invaluable source of protein, without which the caterpillar will die. Later, its diet will consist entirely of leaves, but at this stage, it can't digest greens. The egg case is its last helping hand from its mother. Fiery red tail tips on a nearby leaf signal the presence of a puss moth, half a centimetre long. The tiny caterpillar makes a modest start on the edge of a willow leaf, and round 2 of the fight for survival is on. A few days later, the puss moth has changed, losing its black to acquire a zigzag colour scheme. To achieve this, it has had to cast its first skin, a tricky business, in which the old skin, unyielding and now far too tight, is discarded. As each segment is squeezed loose, the moth puffs the new skin out as much as possible before it hardens, to make room for food yet to be found. Once hard, the skin doesn't grow. The last bit presents an awkward problem. To break a tailpiece now could mean death from the leakage of vital body fluids. Success releases the puss moth caterpillar for another round of eating and expanding, stripping the willow leaves at an increasing rate as its appetite grows. The time comes for a second molt, and for an hour or 2 the banquet has to stop as another tense moment approaches. On with the meal, in ever greater quantities. And now a new mechanism comes into use. To avoid leaving telltale piles of droppings on the leaves, the puss moth caterpillar uses a catapult to disperse the pellets. The skin of the head is cast off in a final molt, and the body follows, revealing its last new suit. The life of the caterpillar, 4 weeks of eating and growing, comes successfully to an end. The stresses of this vulnerable stage are nearly past, and the caterpillar must prepare for the dangerous days to come. For a fully grown caterpillar in the last stage of its creeping life, danger reaches crisis point. A red underwing, 8 centimeters long, presses itself to a twig in search of invisibility. Like others of its age, it is large and a tempting meal for a passing bird. A fully grown puss moth caterpillar, with as close a view as anything will get, is fooled, and the underwing patiently sits out what looks like a painful walkover. The puss moth's colouring is bright, but camouflaged like a battleship, its telltale outline broken against the dark background. The privet hawk, the largest of all these caterpillars, has a camouflage which only works upside down. The white parts of the stripe resemble the shining upper surface of a leaf, shaded below. The horn at the end is harmless, but confirms the impression of a plant. When the elephant hawk caterpillar was young, its green color blended with the stems of its foot plant, and the eye spots with their garish color and precise detail were relatively unimportant. Nevertheless, they might have served to alarm one inquisitive bird, and that alone would increase the caterpillar's chance of survival. As the elephant hawk grows, it becomes too big to imitate any part of a plant, and another ruse must be used. Now the eye spots become an important weapon of defense. They serve as props in its impersonation of a small, but nevertheless threatening snake. When disturbed, it withdraws its trunk, their head segments, and hunches up into a fearsome posture. Even its movements become snake-like. As the summer passes, the weeks of eating and molting come to an end, and the caterpillars prepare for pupation and the end of a whole way of life. The puss moth has abandoned its green and black livery now that it has stopped feeding, and the final glossy maroon form now uses its jaws to scrape at the bark of a willow tree. The caterpillar's whole behavior changes. The overriding urgency now is the building of a cocoon. The caterpillars had to survive for 4 or 5 weeks, but the pupa must last at least 1 winter and possibly 2. And there is no time to spare. Already chemical changes within its body have started. The countdown to lift off as a moth is underway. The caterpillar produces silk from glands in its head, and while the silk is still sticky, bark dust from the earlier scrapings adhere to it. This phenomenon may well have originated by chance when puss moths first evolved, but now it's essential to the concealment of the cocoon. The pupa must lie still through the winter, passed every day by hungry birds, and concealment is its only chance of seeing the spring. The finished product is almost invisible. Inside, the last caterpillar skin is pushed off, but development continues within the pupa. All the caterpillars are preparing for winter now. The emperor builds a silken cocoon at the tip of a hawthorn branch. It draws the leaves round it like blankets against the frost to come, weaving around them a network of transparent strands of pure silk. The finished cocoon is insulated against the cold and tough on the outside. And because it's attached to a thin twig, it'll give way and bounce back if a bird should try to break in. The exit is one way, defended against insect intruders by a circle of spines, like the entrance of a lobster pot. But when the time comes, the moth will be able to push its way out with little difficulty. Spring brings release from the cocoon. An elephant hawk pupa, after lying underground all winter, works its way to the surface when the soil warms and a secret miracle occurs. Soft, crumpled wings expand as the moth pushes fluid into them through elastic veins. At first, the pink underside makes the moth conspicuous, but when the wings are almost completely stretched, a flick brings them to their proper position. The early sunshine brings the muscles of the perfect insect into working condition. And as the fluid dries out, the wing veins harden, making the wing rigid but very light. Nearby is the plant on which the adult will lay her eggs, the rosebay willow herb. A privet hawk moth emerges from its pupa. The pupal case has served its protective function through the winter. Now the moth's heart builds up pressure to expand the wings. A hook on the forewing catches a bar on the hind wing to join the two for flight. Slowly, the wings take on their final form. Occasionally, a small leak of fluid in the tip can cause deformity. Just one more hazard the moth must survive. For 20 minutes or so, the pink and black abdomen has been perilously conspicuous. But gradually, the streaky wings cover the danger and the adult is ready to take its chances in the world. Elsewhere, others are taking the same last step on the road to egg-laying, which will ensure the survival of the species for one more year. The mottled color of the green arches moth is formed by a delicate alignment of millions of tiny scales, overlapping like the tiles on a roof. Here, they produce the dull surface that matches the bark of a tree. But in the eyed hawk, they mimic the glint of an eyeball in a face flushed with rage. Each scale is banded with white to produce the result which evolution has selected as most effective. A different arrangement of scales produces a metallic effect, which makes the burnished brass moth look most unlike food. In addition to its wing pattern, the pale prominent has elongated palps like splinters on a broken twig. Against the odds, these insects have all survived the perils of the helpless egg, the appetizing caterpillar, and the vulnerable pupa. Now, their final and most important purpose is to reproduce. Colorful and cryptic at the same time, so numerous and yet so easy to overlook, they have escaped death by pretending to be something they are not. They have succeeded by being the great deceivers.
Can creatures foretell the weather? Animal Omens tells all tomorrow.